one of the key lessons to take away from that is that a traditional approach to risk management is not effective when the velocity of risk has increased to the extent it has. The volatility is such that it's impossible to predict what newer risks are going to emerge. And so I think the key takeaway is risk management has to change.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Richard Chambers. Richard is the Senior Advisor, Risk and Audit at AuditBoard. And Richard just launched a new book called Connected Risk, Conquering the Perilous Risk Exposure Gap, which aims to be a game-changing solution for internal audit and risk professionals, giving them strategies and insights needed to become a connected risk agent of change. And the link will follow in the show notes of this episode. So, Richard, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast episode.
Well, thank you, Boris, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure, and I believe that we'll have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of your book and also on major topics that interested for risk and audit people are very interested in. So, but before that, Richard, could you tell us a short story about yourself, your career path, and what brought you right now to where you are right now, and what you guys at AuditBoard are up to these days?
Well, Boris, I think some of your viewers may know me. I have a long career in internal audit and risk management. I first became an internal auditor almost 50 years ago. Most of my career was spent in government, in the American government. I was a federal inspector general there and at the Tennessee Valley Authority in the U.S. government. Later, I moved over to the IIA, and some may know me because I was the global president and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors for almost 12 years. So I have a long and experienced background. I was on the COSO board, the Committee of the Sponsoring Organizations of the Treadweight Commission Board, when we released a refresh of the risk management framework in 2017. So I've also, in addition to my internal audit career, had some fairly extensive exposure to risk management. And that's one of the reasons I think that I am considered both the senior advisor for internal audit and risk management for AuditBoard.
Fantastic. So I believe that in our era of where crises are constant and risk evolve at lightning speed, so traditional siloed risk management approaches are no longer enough. So based on your book, Richard, Connected Risk, Conquering the Perilous Risk Exposure Gap, let's discuss risk. Can you show our audience the book?
Yeah, the new book. The new book is coming out in just a few days, and thank you again for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Okay, so let's discuss about the risk management broader impact. Given the interconnectedness of risk in today's business landscape, how does effective risk management impact the overall health and performance of an organization?
Well, Boris, you touched on the real motive or the real impetus behind the need to change the way we manage risk. I think the world is fundamentally changed in terms of the velocity and the volatility of risks in the last few years. Almost as if by design, when the calendar turned to the 2020s, it appeared as though someone stepped on the gas. New risks emerged faster than ever. They were more volatile than ever, whether we're talking about pandemics, geopolitical conflicts, macroeconomic turbulence. We've had everything, really, for these last 5 years. And what we have discovered is that risk management, as we might have traditionally practiced it, is incredibly challenging in an environment where new risks are so rapid in their emergence. So what we're arguing in the book is that the new paradigm, the environment that we're living in, requires a very different approach to risk management. The idea that we have our risk managers sitting in one silo, compliance professionals in another, IT security professionals doing their own thing, and the internal auditors doing their own thing doesn't really work very well. Because while each may be effective at delivering whatever their purpose is, collectively, they're not serving the common goal of an organization to create value. And so what we're saying is, in this environment, there has to be a much more connected approach to how risks are managed.
Fantastic. So you described the limitation of traditional risk management and why you think your traditional approach or siloed approach doesn't work or fell short in our era of constant crisis and rapidly involved risk. But let's discuss how to turn this upside risks into opportunities. How can organizations shift their mindset and to view risks not just as threats, but also as potential opportunities for growth and innovation?
Well, certainly you touched on a very important message there, and that is that risk is absolutely essential to any organization ultimately creating value. You don't create value for your shareholders, your stakeholders, for those who have an interest in your organization. You don't create value if you don't incur any risk. So I think one thing that the risk professionals will call all of these folks that I've been talking about, whether it's management and their roles in the first line, whether it's the oversight functions like risk management and compliance, or whether it's internal audit, I think we're all in essence risk professionals. And if risk professionals are each looking at the risk and helping the organization to manage risk through a very narrow set of lens, it's very difficult for the organization to have a holistic view. I've spoken to audit committees, audit committee chairmen who talk about their frustration of having the risk managers come in and give them one snapshot of risk. Internal audit has a different view. Perhaps the external auditors, the compliance professionals, everyone tends to come up with their own perspective on the risk that the organization faces. And that can be incredibly challenging for a board or even executive management in terms of figuring out how to manage the risk that the organization faces. So it's one of the reasons why there has to be a much more connected approach. That is that all of these risk professionals have to do a much better job of collaborating, understanding what each of them is working on, how they perceive the risks, working from a common set of data. One of the reasons why you see so many different views of risk in an organization is that the internal auditors have their data, their legacy systems. They have their own data that they're pulling from. The same with the risk management professionals. So having a sort of a core platform of data that everyone can pull from is essential, really, to this idea of connected risk. And you know, the title of the book talks about overcoming a risk exposure gap. I think the risk exposure gap is a natural outcome of the environment we're living in, where we have more and more risks, whether we're talking about now more recently AI-related risks, the macroeconomic, geopolitical, third-party risk management, on and on and on. All of these new risks have emerged or at least accelerated in the last 5 years, but yet the resources to tackle those risks have not gone up much at all. Organizations, companies are not spending a lot more money on internal audit. They're spending very little additional money on risk management, compliance. Maybe IT security's got a little more resources, but collectively the resources have not been dedicated to address the ever expanding inventory of risks that an organization faces. So this has led to what we call the risk exposure gap. More risks, not enough resources, and it's one of the strategies for helping to overcome that is a much more connected approach to risk management.
Right. management. Awesome. So let's discuss a little bit the role of internal audit, because our audit is more kind of related to risk management. We didn't have in the past much podcast episodes dedicated to internal audits, to internal audit. So what is a kind of a major misconception in the internal audit space that you kind of strongly disagree with?
Well, one thing that I think perhaps a lot of your viewers don't appreciate is that in a lot of companies, a lot of organizations around the world, internal audit also has responsibility for risk management. In the United States, for example, it's estimated that as much as 30 to 40% of Fortune 500 companies have the same person as heads internal audit is also, in essence, the chief risk officer. So there is a strong connection. There is a strong nexus between internal audit and risk management. And so some might say, well, why is that? Well, ultimately, I think it has to do with the fact that long ago, more than a quarter of a century ago, internal audit recognized that in order to be able to dedicate its resources to the most effectively, most effectively, they needed to focus on where the risks are. So that led to the first standards that required internal auditors to do an annual risk assessment of the company or the organization that they're serving. Almost 22 years ago, the first standards became effective. So for close to a quarter of a century, it's been essential, it's been mandatory for internal audit to undertake a risk assessment, update that risk assessment periodically, and then to build and execute audit plans based on risk. It's essentially the internal auditors have to follow the risks. That's another reason why I think there needs to be a lot of interaction, communication, collaboration between internal audit and risk management, because each of them are undertaking risk assessments, and each of them are taking the story that they have put together around the risk the organization faces. They're taking it to the same audiences. And as I said earlier, it can be very confusing when the risk managers come in with one version and the internal auditors another. But there are a lot of ways that I think internal audit and risk management can collaborate. When it comes to assessing risks, for example, what sense does it make that each of them goes out into the organization, undertakes the interviews with executives, the what keeps you awake at night kind of interviews? It's frustrating, it's exhausting for those executives to have to keep answering the same questions over and over. So why not go in together? Why not collaborate in undertaking the risk assessment and hopefully understanding any different points of view? So if the internal auditors say, here are the risks facing the company, and the risk managers have a different view, why not have a conversation about why those are different and hopefully being able to reconcile that differences?
Fantastic. So let's discuss the future of risk management. What do you see as the future of the risk management job, and what emerging trends or technologies will shape the field in the coming years?
Well, I think any conversation about emerging technologies has to include AI. I think we're likely to see AI play a significant role in helping organizations manage risks. I already see internal audit departments, for example, using AI not to do an assessment of the risk, but I call it sort of a research assistant. So if I'm preparing a risk assessment for a utility company, a power generation company, for example, I may go to the generative AI tools at the beginning of the year and say, here's the size company I have, here's our resources, here's our revenue, here's our generation capability. Give me an estimate, or give me an idea of what are some of the key risks that my company might face in 2025. And so generative AI will provide that information in a matter of seconds or maybe a minute or two. That's not the final risk assessment, but it is some good research to start to do your risk assessment with. And I'm sure that we're going to see those tools become even more sophisticated, so that as risk assessments are undertaken or updated in the future, you're going to use AI, the AI tools that are out there, sort of, as I said, as the research assistant to help you imagine or identify some of the risks that may not otherwise be on your radar.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So let's summarize for someone who is listening to this episode and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways. What would it be?
Well, I think the takeaways for me are that the first half of the 2020s have been the most volatile in terms of risk-induced disruption in any period in recent history. And that one of the key lessons to take away from that is that a traditional approach to risk management is not effective when the velocity of risk has increased to the extent it has. The volatility is such that it's impossible to predict what newer risks are going to emerge. And so I think the key takeaway is risk management has to change. The other key takeaway is one of the ways that it can change or should change is that there's much greater collaboration and that we stop living in our silos, each of us who have a risk management responsibility, that we stop living in silos and that we join forces to help the organizations that we serve create value for its stakeholders or shareholders.
All right, thank you. So these were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you some important questions, you can go ahead and say.
No, I think, Boris, I think you've asked me some very pertinent questions. In the book, we explore, what are the key impetuses for companies that move to a connected risk methodology. So what is it that we see that causes companies to finally say, we've got to change the way we're doing this? We also explore what are the characteristics of connected risk thinkers. Those people who are able to embrace this concept of greater collaboration to help manage risk, what do they have in common? How do they see the world? And then we also talk a little bit about what the future looks like, particularly in an AI-enabled environment, and how risk management might change going forward.
Okay, Richard, thank you again. And I wish you a great success to you personally and to your company, AuditBoard, and success for your book, which we will put a link to it so our audience can purchase it when it's available.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Boris.
Bye-bye.